Hello, fellow pushers. A bit of a special episode this time in that I have a interview with Andy Rourke from Form Square Games. It runs about 80 minutes, and so I wanted to get it out there ASAP. I'll be back with another regular episode of the podcast in about a week with news and all the other things you normally expect. But I just want to get this interview out, so here it is. I hope you enjoy it. Hello and welcome. I'm happy to be here today with Andy Rourke from Form Square Games, a new game company. How are you, Andy?
Very well, thanks. Nice to meet you.
We're talking over the wonders of the internet as usual. So it's like noon here in Calgary, but it's the evening. You're in England somewhere. Whereabouts are you?
So yeah, I'm in England, in the UK. I'm in a place called Guildford, which is just outside London. It's about 20 miles southwest of London, about that much. So,
and is that how long have you lived? How long have you been there? Is that been your base for a long time?
Yeah, I've been in this area. I've moved around the area, but I've always lived in this part of the country since I was born. But a few different towns and villages around, but same right. Area really.
And do you have much of a wargaming scene there? Do you have people to play with there?
Yeah, there's a club, Guildford War Games Club, that I'm a member of. I've been a member there for 20 odd years or more.
Great.
Yeah, do a lot of figure gaming there. Figure gaming is quite big in the UK, but we do board gaming as well. But I'd say it's probably more figure gaming than board gaming, but both. Probably over the last 6 or 7 years, got more into board gaming. There's quite a few other clubs. There's a club in London called the Cardboard Emperors, which I've visited a couple of times, and I know a few people from there that I can meet up with. So yeah, it's easy to get to. It's about 45 minutes from where I am on the train, so it's easy. Very fortunate.
So in terms of if you've got a good group of gamers around, you've obviously you've made the transition from minis games to what would we say to board wargaming.
Yeah.
Does that mean you have a group of playtesters there with you? Then are your mates happy to help you playtest your design?
Yeah. So at the club, there's a big selection of people there, lots of different interests and lots of different periods. I'd say more than half of them are keen on board gaming. I've got a regular group that we meet up with every week or 2 weeks or so, where we do board gaming. We play games of various types, or we might test games. I had 5 friends particularly that were quite keen on doing a lot of testing with me. First game I designed was a 6-player game called Coalitions, and so we needed quite a lot of test players to do that. So I was very fortunate really to have access to so many people that were so willing to play. Still meet up with quite a lot of these people most of the time.
This game that you've published, that you're just published with your new company, the Form Square.
Yeah.
But that's not your first design. You had a design before then.
Yeah. So the first sort of published design I had is something called Coalitions. That's been published by Phalanx. Unfortunately, it's taken forever to get to fulfillment. I think it went to Kickstarter, I think in 2021, and it still hasn't been delivered yet. So it's taken forever.
Yeah.
So
right.
I'm not in on what's going on. I'm just the designer. I have no say on what's happening. I don't know what the delays have been. Some have been COVID. Some have been, the container ship issues that there were a while ago with shipping and things. But it's way past that now. And I think one of the reasons was that they really liked the system. It was a system that was very transferable again. So they actually developed it into 4 different games. And then instead of just sort of publishing one and then publishing another one and so on. They published all four simultaneously. So
Oh,
I think they had a hell of a lot of development work to do, perhaps more than they'd initially thought. And then they decided to switch their manufacturing. They were going to manufacture in Poland, and then at the start of this year they switched it to be manufactured in China. So I think there's just been a long string of delays for one reason or another. I wouldn't say it's anyone's fault in particular. It's just unfortunate. Um, but I'm assured it's going to be delivered soon. I've seen loads of pictures of the final games all finished, all the proofs are done, and everything's done. It looks absolutely beautiful, and I'm very excited to get to play
so
with people. But
you had that designed and sent off to Phalanx, and everything was looking good. But in the meantime, while you've been waiting, you've managed to design another game and
yeah,
start your own company and get that game out the door.
exactly. Yeah. So I mean, one of the things with Phalanx, Phalanx are great. They're a great bunch of people. Um, when I'd signed coalitions to them, they were interested. They had another game that they was looking at that they wanted developing. So myself and another designer, a chap called Scott Moore, who's done an English Civil War called This War Without an Enemy, I think it's called.
Yes,
Might be
yes,
familiar with it.
game. I've played it.
Yeah, it's a block game. Yeah, it's really good. So myself and Scott spent I don't know about 9 months through the lockdown period on Tabletop Simulator, sort of developing another Napoleonic game that Phalanx were working on. Nothing actually has come to that. They still got it, but they haven't published it yet. And we hadn't designed it; we were just developing it. But that process of working all that time, it got me. I was introduced to speaking to lots of different people. I was able to go to a couple of shows and meet people. And so, from being a kind of an outsider on the industry, I was keen on design. So, I was in a group with other players who wanted to play games and design games, but nobody knew anything about the industry. And really, I was very sort of cautious about trying to self-publish, going to Kickstarter or anything myself, because there's a lot of risks. With the amount of money that you might have to spend out with, if you're getting games produced in China and so on. And so it seemed quite scary. But the apprenticeship effectively that I managed to get myself through working with Phalanx was fantastic. It really set me up,
Right.
sort of to go forward.
So that's interesting. So you were a player of minis, then you got interested in board games, then you designed your first and went with Phalanx. That set you up to publish your own. But that was still like that's a lot of risk. Like what's your sort of business model? Did you, like how many did you have to say I'm gonna print 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 and take delivery of that and hope to sell it? Is that the
So,
way it went?
so that's the thing. So I'd spent a lot when I was designing Coalitions, the first game. I'd spend a lot of time researching on the internet, listening to blogs and videos about board game design and so on. A lot of them are not just war games, but just general board game design. And yeah, the numbers seemed a bit scary, and having to go to China to get it made and so on. But I realised that you don't have to go that way. You can do it on a smaller scale. So I had this design. I had this idea for this design of Bonaparte's Eastern Empire already. By the time I'd gone to Phalanx with Coalitions, I already had the skeleton for this game. And this is much more of a war game. Coalitions is a kind of diplomacy risk type of 6-player, forming
Right.
alliances, negotiation type game. It's not a hardcore 2-player head-on-head war game. And neither is Bonaparte's Eastern Emperor. It is a 2-player, and it is much more of a war game, but it's not a real hardcore war game. And so I knew it wouldn't have the broad appeal. There's not going to be hundreds of thousands of people out there that are going to want to buy it. I'm only, if I'm lucky, I'm only going to sell a few hundred copies. So I thought, well, I'll set my target at 50. I thought if I can get 50 people interested. I found printers in the UK who the guy who owns the print shop is a board game designer himself, and
Oh,
they
fantastic.
yeah, and they he has designed. He's on board. His name's Rob Butler. He's a fantastic guy, and he's got a company called Dice Sports, which is a printing company in Sheffield in England. And so I approached him and said I was interested in what's the sort of minimum runs that I could do. And his attitude was, well, we could do 20 games for you if you like, but it costs you more the less you have. But sort of 500, a run of 500 was, be able to do it at a reasonable price. Runs of lower than that would be possible, but you might find there'd be £1 or two a copy more, sort of thing. So I knew I could produce a really low number, and getting them produced in the UK meant that I didn't have to pay for a shipping container to get them from China around the
Yeah.
world and so on. So so that kind of decreased the risk. Get it produced locally, not have so much problems with store. I don't have to store thousands of games that I haven't sold. Haven't got to produce thousands of games that I haven't got customers for. Um, and really, I knew nothing about every step. Every step of the way, I knew nothing. I'd never done any of it before. So I thought, well, if I just aim for 50 games and then just learn every step, every next phase of the development of the game found and the marketing, the distribution, the printing. At each step, I can learn on a really small number. And if I do make a mistake, it might cost me a few £100, but I'm not going to lose my house over it. And so
Right.
that's what I did. So I spent sort of a year and a half beforehand, and then about 9 months from the end of the Game Found campaign to delivery. I think it finished in June, July of last year, and the game was delivered in April of this year. Um, and to be honest, I think the key is having loads of people around you that know what they're doing, because I have found everybody that you meet just really wants to help you. Nobody's trying to stitch you over or take money off you. They all just really want you to succeed. Everyone's
Right.
because it's like a hobby industry. No one's making any real money out of it. I haven't made
Right.
any money at all
That,
out of it.
that's the difference, right?
That's the difference.
We're a niche hobby, so there isn't like millions to be made. There's no monetary drive to screw each other over.
Exactly. You're doing it because you want to be with people that you like and you can relate to. They want to help you. And it's just wonderful. So I've had nothing but help from everybody, which then really helps to limit the mistakes you make. Because, it's like Rob, when I'd send him some stuff and say, well, I want this printed or this, and he'd just look at it and say, no, you've got to change that, or that's in the wrong place. And then he would just change it for me. He wouldn't say, go back to your graphic designer and spend hundreds of pounds getting it done. He'd just say, well, I'll just set this up and you'll be fine. And, thanks very much.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
just really fortunate. And I learned so much that because the game system, the Limits of Glory game system, I wanted it to be transferable to different themes. So Maida, the second game that's sort of out at the moment, transferring everything I'd learned from the first game to the second game was really quite smooth and easy. Almost to the point, it's strange actually, almost to the point where you spend so much time and so much effort designing the first one, and it's so difficult and there's so many hurdles. You do the second one, and it seems really easy. You think, well, why is it? I must be doing something wrong. And this is so much easier. And I think it's because you've already crossed all those hurdles once already, and you're not doing the same thing wrong again. So it's, the second game has got so much easier to the point where you almost feel, oh my gosh, I must be doing something wrong. It can't be this much
Well,
easier. So
I'm
that's been
sure
interesting.
playtesting it now and stuff. I'm sure that there will be new challenges that pop up. They just won't be the same challenges that popped up on the first one.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm talking about at that is more about getting the print files, getting everything, getting the distribution, getting the play
Yes.
testing. Yeah, that's a different matter. So yeah, just as much, if not more, play testing on the second game,
Right.
because
Going back to the first game though, then
yeah,
if you just did a print run of 50 to see how it worked, but then he would still, like, if that that 50 was successful, he went, hey, this is a viable thing. He's the second. There should be a few bucks to save as well. If next time you want to print another 50 or print 100 or whatever your next printing is, those files and systems are all set up already then.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So the first print run I did was 250 copies. So I I wanted to get 50 backers for Bonaparte in Egypt, and I think I ended up with about 85 backers. And then with a few late pledges and a few people wanting to buy them that sort of approached me, I think I ended up selling. When I went to production, I'd sold about 110, 120 copies. And then from the time of production to actually going to fulfillment, I managed to get up to nearly 200
Oh
of
wow!
the 250. And I think I've got about 45, 50 copies left. And they're being offered with the Maida campaign on GameFound at the moment. People can buy a triple pack if they hadn't jumped on and didn't know anything about it. So by the time that the Maida campaign finishes, I'm sure all of my copies of Bonaparte will be gone. So
Right.
so then, but it's only a 250 print run, and they're only doing it in Sheffield down the road. So if there is enough interest, if more than 250 people want to buy it, then as you say, I can now do another 250 print run or 300 print run. And so it's I don't have to sort of get in touch with China and order 2,000 copies,
Right.
which is great.
The when you set up these campaigns for the product that goes out, uh, do they do the fulfillment of that campaign? Like does GameFound handle that, or do you have to do all the shipping yourself?
Yeah, no. So no, GameFound doesn't do it. You have to do it all yourself. So
Hmm.
again, what I did is before I started, I just spent a long time researching, and again finding that people are just so generous with information. That's why I'm happy to speak about this sort of thing, because I followed a campaign for something called Pocket Landships, which was a kind of a fantasy First World War little pocket solo game that you could play with dice. Um, and they sold a lot. They did about £80,000 or something. It raised on Kickstarter. It was really successful. But the guy that was running the campaign was just so fantastically open with all his information that in the updates um, he was talking about where they was getting the distribution from, where it's being printed, when it's being printed, going into the unit costs of how much would cost in and how much he was just telling everyone everything, which was just fantastic. And he talked about his distributor, which was a company in the UK called GMS Distribution. So I thought, well, they sound good. I'll contact them. So I just contacted them and said, I'm getting this game produced in Sheffield by Dice Sports, and they said, "Oh yeah, we know Robert Dice Sports." I thought, "Oh great." so, uh, so, so basically, the printer printed them, wrapped them all up in cartons, put them on a pallet, stuck them on a van, drove them to GMS, the distributors, who then handled all of the worldwide distribution. So everyone from everywhere, Australia, Canada, America, Europe, all the fulfillment went out of the UK. So I didn't have sort of hubs in America and hubs in Asia,
Right.
because that wouldn't be a practical thing to do.
How does that affect you uh, going forward? So the campaign for the first one, Bonaparte's Eastern Empire, is over.
Yeah,
But now, if somebody from New York says, "Hey, I'd like a copy of that," is it was it much easier or cheaper to have a GHX or whatever they were called
yeah,
to
GMS.
send it GMX, or like now when you're just sending a single copy overseas,
Yeah.
whether it's to the US or South America or wherever, is that does that become like crazy expensive in terms of shipping?
So GMS is they're like a distribution hub, a distributor. So in a way, a bit like an Amazon type hub, no different from that. So they handle books, games, all sorts. They call them fancy goods. Post anything anywhere basically. So it's just like a big warehouse that sends out stuff. And so all of the games were sent there. I got a handful of games sent here. Just like 10 copies or whatever. But everything else went to GMS. So that all of the games are sitting at GMS. The ones that are left are on a shelf somewhere in GMS. So if you, because I've got a website where people can order games off the website. So when the GameFound campaign's not going on, people can buy them direct. or you can get them when the game found's going on. So whilst when the game found campaign had finished, if somebody ordered a copy, I would get an order in through my website, and then I would basically just email GMS and say, could you send one copy to Fred Blogs in the USA, and this is his address, and they'd send it to him, and then they would send me a bill, and it's cheaper for me to get them to send it because of their contacts and their couriers and their shipping and then the bulk that they do it, than for me to take it down to the post office and just send a parcel to America or wherever I wanted to send it.
Right, or
Yeah,
UPS or FedEx or whatever.
exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so
Oh, that's fantastic.
yeah, so they just keep hold of the stock and send it out as I give them orders. Yeah.
That's a great story because you were able to produce and ship everything using UK suppliers.
Yeah.
Uh, I know I'm in Canada, so it doesn't it's a whole different thing. But I talk to a lot of publishers in the US, and as much as they want to do made in US, they just can't find the cost savings are just so huge to go to China, even on a small scale. Like there's very few publishers that are made in America just because the jack it pushes the price up too high. So to be able to find something that's reasonable where you save on container shipping,
Yeah.
and that allows you to pay a little bit more for local production. That's fantastic.
That's exactly it. And the time when I was actually thinking about this was, in the middle of COVID. There's a worldwide container shortage. The price of shipping and containers have gone through the roof. And I was just thinking, well, it doesn't make sense to get a game made in China and send it around the world in a container. If the person I want to sell it to lives in England, why don't I make it in England and just send it to him, for £7 rather than spending thousands of pounds on a container to ship it around the world. So that was the motivation behind me finding out all this in this information in the first place. I wanted to try and keep it as local as possible.
Well, that's fantastic. Let's talk about that first game. I've played it 2 or 3 times now.
Oh, great!
I'm terrible as the French, but I'm totally enjoying it. It's so if anybody hasn't seen it yet, there we go. That's here's the box because I got the box open, but it's Bonaparte's Eastern Empire, and it's as you say, it's your intention to have a system game. It's the first of what may be a series of games, but it's got a few unique things going on in it. I mean, the big one, of course, is the glory points, where each of the different commanders has a variable number of glory points, which I think is just genius. You don't as a player, you don't know how many points, say, Desailly or Keebler or whoever is actually going to have until they actually detach from Napoleon and start going. And I really appreciate how it's not just like 3d6 for each one. One may be 2d6, one may be 10 plus 3d6. Like it's you've made it so that the better leaders should get more glory points than the worst leaders, but it's not set in stone. It's very variable, which I think is going to make the game more replayable as well.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully. I mean, the whole glory concept. When I first started designing it, I wanted to represent luck and skill. And when I first started to design it, each commander had 2 attributes. You had an attribute of luck and an attribute of skill. But then you ended up with double the amount of counters, and it was all a bit too cumbersome. So I sort of condensed it into this sort of single glory rating. And so, interesting things like Nelson. Nelson is the only character in the game that is able to get more glory. Everybody else, they get the glory that they've got, and it just reduces as the game goes on. But Nelson was highly regarded as being very unlucky to have missed the French fleet on its way to Egypt. Some reports even say they sailed past each other in the night in the mist and didn't even realise that they had intersected each other. So Nelson's glory rating at the start of the game is very low, and Bruyère's is my French is terrible, so all the pronunciations of French
Oh,
commanders
me too.
is probably wrong. But Bruyère's the French fleet commanders. Um, his rating is slightly higher than Nelson's, and you might think, well, why is that? And it's because they were really lucky, and Nelson wasn't. But if Nelson doesn't manage to intercept the French fleet on the way, then Nelson's rating is the only one that will go up. He goes up to reflect the fact that once he then did find the French fleet, it was extremely skillful at completely destroying it at the Battle of the Nile. So all the other commanders, they just have this single glory rating. And what I'm trying to do with the whole glory system is give the player loads and loads of little tiny decisions that they've got to make throughout the whole game. And so quite often with a game, virtually any game you play, you get to a point, it's like a breaking point in the game where sort of one thing can happen, and that's the end. If you roll a 6 or if you roll a 1, you win or you don't win or whatever. And that can be a common thing with lots of games for lots of reasons. But what I wanted to do in this is make the player have to make lots of decisions where they don't always know why they're making them. How much reserves you leave where, which commanders you leave where, because the way the events happen in the game, nobody really knows what's going to happen and when it's going to happen or if it's going to happen. And so you can't think, well, I know on turn 13 the British are going to turn up at that point, so I'll leave a strong force there, because you just don't know that that's going to happen. So you, as a commander, you have to plan, as a player, you have to plan for any eventuality, and then you constantly got to judge how much of your glory that you've got left you're willing to burn through to get things to happen, or whether you can wait. And so it also implies, because there's no supply rules or anything like that in this game, but there is this attrition. The attrition runs through the whole game. Your forces just get weaker and weaker as you go on, and you get thinner and thinner, weaker and weaker, and you really start to feel the grind. Especially as a French player, you start off feeling
Yeah, there's no reinforcements for the French.
no,
The, the British and the Ottomans and the Mamluks may get a little more as we go along, but as the French, it's terrible every time you lose a single infantry point. It's like it's tragic. I should mention for viewers or listeners, I'll have a bigger piece on how the game works, but just you said these little decisions constantly. The way the glory points work is, in one way, is every time you try to move, you have to roll some dice depending on the area you're in, and if you weren't successful, you can spend some of your glory points to re-roll. Same thing in combat. You're going to roll 4 dice, and if you don't get the results you like, you can spend some of your glory to re-roll, or you can spend some of your glory to make your opponent re-roll. But you've got this limited amount of glory that you're especially in the case of your best commanders, you're trying to squeeze it out all the way to the end. As the French commanders in particular. Yeah. So that's those sort of tiny decisions, because you think, oh, 1 or 2 points here or there, but they suddenly, Desai only has like 11 glory left, and you still haven't got him. You haven't taken the savants all the way to the end of the line of the Nile there, and you're like, what am I going to do?
Exactly. I mean, things like trying to relieve a siege, and you're sending troops to try and get somewhere to relieve the siege. If you have to use up so much glory to get there, by the time they get there, the commander that's with them, and it's really, the game's all about the commanders. The troops are just kind of, you need the troops, but the troops without commanders are completely worthless, effectively, because they're just victims. And so if you spend so much of your commander's glory to get your troops in position, then you've got no strength left to fight with. So you really have to nurse it. So
there's no commander. You can't re-roll, and you can't force your opponent to re-roll. Not to mention, you have a really interesting combat results table that the different, like the British with a commander and the British without a commander are different lines on that table. The same with the Ottomans with or without, very different lines on that table. I think the French, it's the same. It's just the same.
It's the same
line. But you don't get the re-rolls.
It's the re-rolls that's key, Because if you haven't got
Yeah,
a commander and your opponent has, they can re-roll to get more hits on you, and they can force you to re-roll your hits. So, and you
yeah,
can't do anything about it. So, if you haven't got a commander, you're a sitting duck, really.
yeah, yeah. As the French, I try to leap on those spots where there's no commander right away.
Yeah,
That's just to, take the low hanging fruit as quick as you can.
yeah. That's it. I mean, as the ally player with the Mamelukes, you might think, well, the Mamelukes, they can't, it's hopeless whenever they try and fight. But one of the keys to the Mamelukes is, after practice, you could you could try a big battle to start with. Murad with his whole army. There's quite a few times when you might get 2 or 3 or even 4 French casualties. You can do some damage with the rerolls, but very soon you're pretty hopeless. And then what you've got to do is you've got to disperse. You've got to send your Mamluks individually out as much as possible, disperse into the desert, go up the Nile, run away and disperse, and then wait out your time. Because the French they have to occupy everywhere to win, and they haven't got enough stuff. So a lot of places probably end up being occupied with just the commander, the built-up areas. And then you can send a Mameluke cavalry, just one single Mameluke cavalry, back into that space to start uprisings. And the defending commander can't do anything about it because he can't come out of the built-up area to fight you. So if you can just get 1 or 2 of your Mamelukes to survive, they can be a real nuisance to the French. And also, if you do disperse, then the French can end up using loads of glory trying to mop you all up, moving around, trying to catch you and so on. And so
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
draining, you're constantly draining all of the French resource.
Well, and you make a good point there about some like the French can't keep control of any of the built-up areas without leaving a unit there, and it can be an infantry unit or it can be a leader or a cavalry unit, or
Yeah,
I mean, who'd leave an artillery unit there? That would be crazy.
yeah,
Um, but you sometimes are forced to like those infantry points are so critical. You're going to need them every one to the end. So sometimes you do leave a leader. Like
mm,
a leader can be he might only have 2 or 3 glory points left, or none. He might be exhausted. So it's a good use of a leader, but they are completely uh, indefensible.
mm,
When they're left on their own.
yeah. So if the leader's inside the built-up area, because Mamelukes cannot fight sieges, so the leader inside the built-up area is completely safe, other than from uprisings.
The
But
uprisings, yeah.
But as soon as the Ottomans turn up or the British turn up, then a leader on his own could be in trouble because obviously they could start a proper siege. Um, so there's all these decisions to make. There's no right answer. Who do you leave? Where do you leave? What do you leave? There's no right answer. You've just got to try and work it out.
Well, to talk a little bit more about that, your combat system, it's really interesting too because you have these horizontal lines, depending on if you're British with or without a leader, if you're Ottoman with or without a leader, etc. And then the rows correspond to how many strength points you have, and then you find the little box of like how many hits you're going to do if you get hits.
Yeah.
But there's also another number in each of those boxes that is the minimum amount you have to roll on the 4 dice, and I found that so clever because you look at that Mamluk line, and sometimes the Mamluks, like, they'll have a tremendous amount of, they might, maybe they have 20 guys in the same spot, and they're only going to do a couple of hits because they don't hit really on 5s, and they only hit on the 6s. And you think, oh, I'm still in trouble because they've got so many, but you've got to roll a really high number in total to make those hits actually hit. That was like taking your idea for the combat results table and adding another flip into it that really makes it different between it lets you differentiate between the different forces, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Exactly. It really creates the asymmetry. So you could have a battle with 4 French infantry and a really good commander, and he could go and take on 20 Mamelukes and beat them. And that's
Yeah,
what the French did. I mean, they would go around in relatively small numbers and take on huge Ottoman armies and huge Mamluk armies, and they would win. And quite often in these battles, the Ottomans or the Mamluks might get 2, 3, 4,000 casualties, and the French would get sort of 20 dead and 100 wounded.
Right.
Yeah, and so to try and represent that in a game was quite a challenge, and that was the way that I sort of came up with doing it, making it harder for the poorer quality troops to actually start even causing hits.
It works brilliantly, and at the same time, when the Mamluks do manage to get take down one or two French infantry units, as the French, you're just devastated. Like, oh my God, how did I lose? I need that unit.
Yeah.
It's a terrible thing to lose a unit to the Mamluks if when it happens.
Interestingly, I was at PunchCon, which is a show in the UK. Not this PunchCon, but the PunchCon the year before when I was demonstrating Bonaparte in Egypt. And Fred Saval was there, and he came up
Oh yeah, yeah.
and he came up and he said, "Oh, I'll have a go." And he was playing. He was playing with my colleague Ray, and he sort of sat down and he was playing the French, and he just started cruising around. And because it was so powerful, it destroyed one lot and then another lot and then another lot. And he just thought, "Oh, this is easy." And then he came up against the Mamluk army and attacked it, and the dice didn't go well for him, and he lost 4 French infantry. And he went, "Ah, right, I get it now. I've got to be careful." And you can see like the look on his face, like, "Oh, I read this completely wrong. You know, this is way more tactical than I thought." Which
Yeah,
was interesting.
like when you first look at the Mamluks or the Ottomans, and they have like there's a I think there's an Ottoman army that starts with like 24, and it looks overwhelming. And then
Yeah,
the first time you hit them as the French, you go, oh, okay, no, the CRT balances that out. But then when you take a couple of losses, then you have another realization. It's like there's a few steps of learning to see how the asymmetry really works in this game.
yeah. And it's hard for the French to keep their whole army together because they've got so much ground they got to cover. So early on you can land on the coast and take your whole army perhaps off towards Egypt and hit Murad before he gets a chance even to move if you can keep the momentum up. And so you can think, oh, this is easy. You turn up with a huge French army, you completely destroy the Mamelukes, make them all run away. But you do have to start dispersing. You do have to start sending stuff into different places. And then you might be facing, you've got to get up to Acre, and Jezza Pasha's army is huge, and you
Yeah,
might only have 8 infantry to go up there. That's all you got left. And so you think, oh, right, okay, this is a bit more of a challenge now than I thought it was.
yeah. There's a point when you're playing the French where you go, am I going to, because as the French, to win the strategic victory, you have to take all the
You
locations,
do, yeah.
and you have to get the savants all the way down to the end of the Nile, and you have to take all the other locations. Uh, Failing that, it becomes a victory point game, and it as the French, there becomes a point sort of 2/3 of the way through where you have to decide if you're still going for the whole thing or if you're going to try and hang on to what you've got.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that depends on the events as well. One of the key events is Sir Sidney Smith turning up, because the real siege of Acre, obviously, Sir Sidney Smith turns up and he really helps in the defence, and his ships help in the defence, and it's a real problem for the French. And
Well,
sorry,
that's interesting. I wanted to ask you about the naval, the the It's basically a land game, but you, I, I imagine you felt like you couldn't do this campaign doing without going running past Nelson. That's just such a huge part of the story, that missed opportunity,
yeah,
that had to be there. So the game starts with the naval invasion phase, and once you get where the the French have 3 different fleets. The British don't know which one the French are actually in, and the British just have the Nelson's fleet. And you get across the Med, and either you take some hits from Nelson or you don't. But one way or the other, you're gonna get into Egypt, and you're gonna go do all that. But that leaves Nelson and his few squadrons, and the French squadrons. There's The French don't get any more. any more ships or anything like that. And but the like you say, Sir Sidney Smith is going to pop up, and he's going to need to go from where he pops up at Rhodes or
That's
something like
yes.
I can't
I think
remember.
I think Cyprus he comes at.
Cyprus, yeah, that sounds right.
Cyprus. Yeah.
So, but he pops up with some ships as well. But I guess the the naval game then becomes for the French trying to keep him from making it to Acre to do his siege of Acre, I suppose. And I guess Nelson is trying to wipe out all of the French navy that's left.
Yeah.
Although Napoleon can also leave, so the
You-
French need a squadron for that as well.
So yeah, so there's a few things there. So with Nelson, if Nelson intercepts the French fleet on the way to Egypt, then Nelson is removed and the French fleets are removed, and that's it. There's no fleets placed. If he doesn't intercept them, then then he gets Trowbridge and Hood joins him. The French get Villeneuve and Duchela. Um, and then there's the potential for fights, and that's representing, he didn't find them, and then there's the Battle of the Nile, and these are sort of commanders and ships are there. The British Navy will fight a lot better than the French Navy, but
Yes.
it is possible, and on purpose, it is quite possible that the two navies will meet each other, and effectively all the ships will be destroyed. And it's not that I want them to be destroyed. The Battle of the Nile, I mean, the British won it, but virtually every single ship that was engaged was so heavily damaged that it had to go back to be repaired. So whether you win a naval battle or lose a naval battle, it tends to mean that you have to go back off station and get your ship sorted out because they've all been absolutely wrecked in the naval battle. And so that's what that is trying to represent. Um, the interception, I mean, Nelson had about 13 ships with him, and the French invasion fleet, depending on which source you read, is about 400 to 500 ships. So even if he had intercepted it, you could argue that it's quite a good chance that a lot of the ships would still have made it because
Right.
the 13 ships can't stop 500, but he could have stopped quite a few of them and cause problems. And that's why if you're intercepted, you still turn up, but you just turn up with a lot less stuff because it's been intercepted. And then the reason I wanted a bit of naval in the rest of the game is there's no more French fleets introduced. You get Sir Sidney Smith because he was such a strong character in the game. He was so in history. He was so pivotal at the siege of Acre. He had to be in the game. And then later on, the British turn up with Lord Keith with
Yes.
squadrons. And again, that happened in 1801. They turn up with these fleets. But also, most of the Ottoman armies that came, there was 4 large Ottoman armies that were raised in this period. Most of them, again, came across the sea. So they came from Rhodes. I think in the game we've got being at Jaffa and El Arish, one at Rhodes, and Captain Pasha, who's actually an Albanian. So
Yeah.
Captain Pasha's interesting. He was an Ottoman trained with European. His troops were trained the European way, and so he became really kind of quite snobby towards the Ottomans, and he wouldn't cooperate with the Ottomans. So he would only allow his troops to fight with the British. He wouldn't allow them to fight with the Ottomans. And so I've tried to reflect that in the game as well. And so that's what the naval aspects in there. And the British naval ships can have quite a large effect on sieges, any coastline sieges, because they can add their guns to the siege. And you can also
Yeah.
use the commander for his glory. If he's the most senior commander at present, then his glory can be used for rerolls. So a really
Right.
important part of the game.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like that. It feels as the French. You've only got these sudden once Smith and Keith show up. It's you as the French naval. You just feel completely uh, outnumbered and overpowered.
Yeah.
Not to mention the British squadrons are worth like 4, and the French are worth 2. So you're outgunned, and
Yeah,
it's not a one-on-one fight even in a one-on-one.
no. And for Bonaparte returning, because Bonaparte can return in the game as well if the French player chooses. So they don't have to keep, because the counters represent squadrons. So it's like Hood's squadron and Trowbridge's squadron and so on. So it's not just one ship. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
but for Bonaparte to get back to France, we're just representing just the frigate, the Murion, that took him back. There was two frigates, but that was the one he was on, and it's just really a counter to get him across the sea. He can actually use his glory. Bonaparte can use his glory if he's got any left, to influence the movement at sea of the Murion as well. Um, and so that becomes a bit like the interception phase. The British, any British ship can try and intercept the Murion on its way back to France if Bonaparte's on it.
yeah. But you've managed to put all the story
Yeah,
into the game, which is great because it is an interesting story. I mean, I remember when I was I just read what's his name, Patterson, Chandler, the
yeah.
campaigns of,
David Chandler.
yeah, yeah, Chandler's book. I just read that last year for the first time, and reading the about the Egyptian campaign, when Napoleon sees that it's not going the way he had hoped, and he just leaves them all there. It just seems so incredible. It's like he's leaving like the cream of his army
Yeah,
and just abandoning them.
exactly. And also, as well, there's the kind of impression that the French are kind of cut off in Egypt, but it really wasn't the case at all. There was a lot of ships that went backwards and forwards between France and Egypt. There was a lot of communication. Bonaparte would often send people back to France with messages and things, and boats would arrive with small amounts of reinforcements or officers or messages. So, the British were trying to blockade it, but it's a big place to blockade, and the Mediterranean is a big ocean. So the French, it was porous. They did get things. In fact, actually, quite a funny story is Napoleon. You might know this, but Napoleon. One of his junior officers had a pretty attractive young wife with him that Napoleon took a fancy to and started an affair with. So he decided to send the young officer back to France with a message to get him out of the way. And
Right.
the British intercepted the ship, caught him, but it was kind of an open secret that Bonaparte was having an affair with his wife, and they knew. So the British caught him and returned him back to Alexander rather than taking him prisoner, which I thought was excellent.
It's totally great. It's like the micro level of aggression.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to talk a bit about is the event table,
Hmm.
the event chart, because the name event table makes it sound like it's just a bunch of random events, and in some ways it is, but it's also the way it's also the turn track without there being a formal turn track, because there's a randomness to how you don't know exactly when the game's going to end.
Yeah.
You get the wrong event once you get to the bottom of the track there, and you roll a 13, I think it is, once you're on the fourth.
It's 14. Yeah, 14.
Or 14, yeah, and it's game over.
Hmm.
But you never know how much time you have left. That's I wish more games had that sort of variable ending. I find that just ratchets up the tension just a little bit more.
Oh, it really does, because often by the time you're at that stage, the French player often can't win by conquest, and they're having to hang on. And
Hang on.
the Allied player only has to take Cairo and Alexandria. They don't have to worry about reliberating everything. So the French player can be in the position that they've still got a lot more victory points than the British player, the Ottoman player. But the British and Ottomans are going hell for leather to take Alexandria and Cairo. So there's this massive amount of pressure. The Allies have got to grab these two places, and the French have just got to cling on and hope that 14 comes up. What the 14 is representing, because I call it an event clock rather than an event table, and it is a clock, because as the game goes on, you roll more dice on the table that introduces more events, and the events that get introduced are events that happen chronologically later in the campaign.
Yeah.
So hopefully the game follows a roughly historical chronology. Um, but again, it's slightly random. You don't know what's going to happen and when. But both players are forced to make decisions about whether to make a lunge or whether they can wait another turn. Because you might be thinking, well, I'll just wait one more turn to make it slightly more favourable. But then the game ends and you've lost because you
Right.
didn't do it fast enough and so on. So those are the sort of decisions you've got to constantly sort of struggle with whilst you're playing.
Yeah, especially as you get farther down that event clock, because as you said, it's you roll more and more dice the farther you go,
Hmm.
and there's but it's not until you get to the last. Well, actually, it's just the fourth
When
on
you're
the
on,
fourth
yeah,
when you roll the four dice,
when you're on,
that there's a chance for it to end. But I've had it happen where I went from the first line for I was on the first line for quite a while,
yeah,
and then went to the second line, and within two rolls I was on the third line. Like you can go really quickly
yeah.
through and think, oh my god, the time is
It's
going
designed
way too
it's
quickly.
designed to be like that. So if you roll a 7, which is the most common number you're going to roll with 2 dice, if you roll a 7, you'll move on to 3 dice. And so
Yeah,
when you're rolling 1 dice, an event might come up to say immediately re-roll with 2 dice. You roll those 2 dice, and the most likely number you're going to get is 7, which will then put you on 3 dice. So you might be playing
yeah,
away thinking, "Oh, I'm really comfortable. We're just on 1 dice. I've got loads of time." And then bang, you're on 3 dice, and you're thinking, "Oh my god, this might not. Yeah, there might not be many more turns. I've got to pull my
yeah,
finger out."
absolutely.
Do tend to find the way that the maths works as well. You will stay on 3 dice. Again, it is random, so it's not guaranteed, but you're more likely to stay on 3 dice for a little. You'll be on 3 dice a lot longer. Um,
Right,
you'll never go sort of. I mean, mathematically, there is a chance that the game could be over in 5 turns. So that's the
right.
quickest possible way if all the things happen. And so perhaps one it could be that it goes that way, but because of the variable turn length, you can still win the game easily as the French in 5 turns. And it's your advantage because not all the events, most of the events are disadvantageous to the French. So the quicker the game goes through, as long as you can keep lots of momentum and keep doing stuff, you haven't had so many bad events occurring
Yeah,
that are setting
yeah,
you back. If you know what I mean. So if a game does finish really fast, um, it doesn't mean that the French have got no chance. If anything, it could give them slightly more chance.
yeah. Because lots of those events give new reinforcements to the British, or they bring the British in, or the reinforcements to the Ottomans. It's like oh, there's the French. There's hardly anything good for you there.
Yeah, I think there's about four good events. I think for the French, and the rest of them favour the others. And the whole 14, the whole concept of the game ending like that is because researching the whole game, and read so many accounts and different things. Um, it does seem at the end in 1801, the British army out there was under a tremendous amount of pressure from the British government to get this finished. The Peace of Amiens talks were going on in France, and Napoleon wanted Egypt to be a French colony. And all the time he had troops in Cairo and Alexandria, he could rightfully argue that he controlled Egypt. And so the British were under tremendous pressure to take Alexandria and Cairo and get the French army out of Egypt before the peace was signed and everyone had to stop fighting. And likewise, Napoleon was sending messages to Menou, by this time the commander, saying you've got to hang on as long as you possibly can, because the peace talks in Europe wouldn't have changed over what was going on in Egypt. The peace talks were the peace talks, and at some point they were going to come to a conclusion. Egypt's just a small sideshow. They wouldn't hold off just for that. And so both sides were under this tremendous pressure, one to hold on and one to finish the job. And I wanted to reflect that in the game because you're in Egypt, you're weeks, if not months away from what's going on in Central Europe. So one day a boat is just going to appear off the coast and someone's going to get out and say, oh, by the way, chaps, we've all signed a peace treaty. We're all friends now. You've got to stop fighting. And nobody knows when that day is going to be because there's no
Right.
phones or anything else. So literally, the pressure was on to get it done, and nobody knew when it was going to end. And I wanted to reflect that in the game.
Well, it's a really the time clock thing is really cool, and I love how some events are single use and some are um, repeatable. Like there's all kinds of clever things in that chart. But let's talk now. So that's the first game, but you've got a second game in development now. Maida, is that? I
Yeah,
don't know how you pronounce it.
yeah,
It's based.
Maida.
It's the invasion of Sicily, 1806. I mean, there's a famous Battle of Maida, but this is
Yeah,
given your system. This must be more about the whole invasion of Sicily. I'm guessing.
yeah. So the Battle of Maida in 1806. The Battle of Maida was actually the largest single British victory over the French on continental Europe of the Napoleonic Wars to that point. So much so that it was in England, in the UK, it was absolutely fated as the greatest thing ever. When Stuart came back, he was made given the keys of London and fated as a great general. There's an area in London called Maida Vale, which was named after the battle. It was like fantastic. But then 2 or 3 years later, the Peninsular War started. Arthur Wellesley comes along, later Lord Wellington, the Battle of Waterloo, and Maida's just forgotten about. But in 1806, it was like the best bit of news that the British had because a British army had gone toe to toe with the French army on equal terms almost, and the British had won. And it was the first time it had happened. And people were over the moon really. And so the game is about the campaign that culminates in the Battle of Maida. And it's all part of the Third Coalition. So even though it's in 1806, and we normally associate the Fourth Coalition with 1806, but the Third Coalition, so the Battle of Austerlitz, William Pitt had sort of organised this Third Coalition. The Austrians and the Russians were going to sort of invade France through Central Europe. And as part of this, William Pitt had persuaded the Russians to send an army to southern Italy, and they were going to send a British army there as well. And this joint army, was going to then invade with the Neapolitans, was going to invade northwards into northern Italy in support of the Third Coalition and the attacks in Central Europe. But Napoleon's so fast, he basically wiped out the Austrians and defeated the Russians at Austerlitz before they'd even got going. So by sort of December 1805, the Russians and the British are in Naples, and now they're the only forces that are basically in mainland Europe that haven't been defeated by Napoleon. Um, so it was a bit of a oh my God, what do we do now? Napoleon was really upset with Ferdinand, who was the king of Sicily, because Ferdinand had agreed to stay neutral and then immediately sort of changed his mind and invited the British to land.
And he ends up having to like escape Sicily, right? He's like, or he had to flee Sicily.
King Ferdinand, yeah. So Bonaparte decides to send Marshal Massena with an army of about 40,000 men to invade Naples, the mainland southern Italy, and to invade Sicily. That was the plan. Take it all, depose the king of Naples, the king of the two Sicilies, and put his brother Joseph on the throne. So that was the plan. The Russians, like stoic Russians, they'd been told they've got to stay in Naples, and their commander, a chap called Lacy, who was quite old. He was in his 70s, and he was of Irish descent. And he was absolutely not going to do anything unless he was told by the Tsar. And so until he had a message from the Tsar, he was going to stay and defend the capital of Naples. And the British, in their wisdom, had put their general, Craig, under Lacy. So Lacy was the supreme commander, and Craig was subordinate to him. And Craig pledged to stay on mainland Italy all the time the Russians stayed. And so come sort of January 1806, Massena's starting to head towards southern Italy, and the Neapolitans, the Russians, and the British basically are deployed across the boot of Italy in a line with the Russians in the middle, the Neapolitans on the right, and the British on the left, to prepare to meet him. And then about 2 weeks before Massena had actually got to the border, a messenger arrived from the Tsar to Lacy to tell him that he had to evacuate and he had to get off, because the Russians had a lot of the Ionian Islands at this time, so they had Corfu and these sort of places. So the Russians went back to Corfu, And because they had gone back, then the British said, well, we'll leave. But the King of the Two Sicilies wouldn't allow the British to land in Sicily. So Ferdinand left the capital of Naples, went back to Sicily, and said to the British, you've been enough trouble. You're not coming onto this island. So the British had to bob about in boats for about 3 weeks in the Bay of Sicily without being allowed to land, whilst the French sort of basically overrun the mainland of Italy. So that's what actually happened in the historical campaign at the start in January. And I thought this is really interesting. I thought, well, with this whole event clock type of system, with a slight randomness to things happening, I thought, well, let's investigate what happens if the Russians didn't get the message from the Tsar. What happens if the French arrive and the Russians are still there and the British can't leave until the Russians are left? And then, obviously, I wanted it to have an historical effect as well. So the Russians will leave, and they may well leave before the French invade, or they may not leave before the French invade. Depends on how the game goes and the event clock goes. But basically, the British are going to be left on their own. The Neapolitans, the British can take some of those off and take them back to Sicily if they can get them on boats. But they've got the fortress of Gaeta to try and defend, which is really important to the Neapolitans. But the British just haven't got enough troops to fight the French. It's 40,000 French and there's about 8,000 British. So they couldn't fight them toe to toe. So they went back. Eventually, Ferdinand allows them to land on Sicily. And then until about late June, July, so sort of 5-6 months, there's this kind of standoff. The French had taken the whole of mainland and the British were on the island. And the French were preparing to invade, and Napoleon was absolutely adamant they had to invade. And so in this game, there's a lot more naval stuff. Instead of having squadrons, we've got ships, we've got frigates, we've got third rates, we've got gunboats, we've got invasion barges. So the control of the sea is really important. There's lots of potential for gunboat action because it was a bit like the Battle of Britain. Almost every day, boats would go out from Messina and from the mainland, from the French side, and just go about in the Straits of Messina in just little rogue gunboats shooting at each other, trying to get dominance of the Straits so one side could invade or the other one could invade. And then finally, in July 1806, Stuart, who's now commander of the British, he made his lunge because he'd worked out that if he can land in Italy and then destroy the French preparations, then the French wouldn't be able to invade Sicily because he had messed up all their preparations. So he landed the British army at Maida, and on the 4th of July, great day for America, the Battle of Maida occurred, and the British won. And that effectively meant for the next 2 years, Sicily was safe from invasion because after the battle, the British went down towards the toe. They captured the fortresses at Reggio and Scylla. Again, I can't pronounce anything, so that's probably not how it's pronounced. And they kept garrisons on both sides of the straits, and the French couldn't really build up enough force to retake them. So it guaranteed the safety of Sicily for at least 2 years because of the Battle of Maida. So that was a bit rambling. Sorry, I went on a bit there, but that's basically the background to it.
So the game is going to be it's going to use the same system. We're going to have the glory points. We're going to have the event clock, the same kind of combat, but with different nationalities a bit, but with a much bigger naval component.
Potentially,
obviously.
Yeah.
But when has that game gone to GameFound yet, or is it? Campaign?
It's actually, whilst we're speaking now, it's actually live on GameFound at the moment. But obviously, I don't know when people will be watching this. But it went live on GameFound on the 30th of July, 2024, and it's on for 28 days. So I think it finishes just the end of August, sometime about the 28th of August or something like that. 26th.
This will definitely be published when people will still get a chance to. It'll be before the end of August.
Yeah.
By the time I get to the door, so
it's live now. It's live now.
Yeah. And do you have more games scheduled in this to use this series? Have you got other ones that you're firm on or you're toying with?
Yeah. So on the Maida GameFound page, I've also I've got another game on offer with it, which in the Limits of Glory series. So what I'm trying to do with the series is I'm trying to make sure I can use it at different scales. So in Egypt, the French had, I don't know, 40,000 men, and the Ottomans and everything, talking hundreds of thousands. In Maida, the Russians and British combined is only 15,000. The French are only about 40,000, so it's a smaller scale. I'm doing another game called Santa Mora and Capri, and it's 2 games in a single box, and they're designed to be shorter games. So they're still using the same system, but instead of each player having 4 dice, each player's only got 3 dice. So you only have 18 events rather than 24, and spaces are numbered between 1 and 3 rather than 1 and 4, and so on. So there's less events, there's less troops. The Capri campaign is Marshal Joachim Murat, is now the king of Naples, and he wants Capri back because in 1806, as part of the Maida campaign, this chap Sidney Smith, who we've already spoken about, he was a bit of a loose cannon. He didn't really want to do what the British were wanting. He was meant to be supporting the attack into Maida and the landings. Instead, he sailed off up the coast, landed his Marines on Capri, and captured Capri. And so the British have held Capri for the last 2 years. So even though the mainland's all French, Italian, Neapolitan, Capri, which is only just off the mainland in the Bay of Naples, has had a British garrison for the last 2 years, and Murat's had enough and he wants it back. So the game about Capri is the Neapolitan and French landing on Capri to get it back. And that campaign only lasts about a week. Well, it's slightly over a week, about a week and a half, 10 days or so. The actual fighting, it's very quick. There's only about 1,500 British troops on there, and there's in total about, the French have about 20,000 troops, but they're not all engaged. Only about 7,000 or 8,000 arrive straight on. So very small numbers, very short game, short time span, and it was kind of a design exercise to see if I can get it working, at a smaller scale, so people can just have a foot. It's designed to last for about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. Once you know the system. Right. And Santa Mora is the same. So Santa Mora is one of the Ionian Islands, which again the French had got as part of the Treaty of Tilsit. They had been ceded it by the Russians, and by 1810, I think they'd had 7 of the Ionian Islands. The British had been taking them back off them. They just had Santa Mora and Corfu left, and the British landed on Santa Mora to take it back in 1810, and that lasted about 3 weeks. Getting a bit of naval stuff, siege. A lot of the people that are in all these games sort of run through them. So Sidney Smith had sort of captured Capri. The garrison commander of Capri is a chap called Hudson Lowe, who goes on to be Napoleon's jailer in St Helena. But Hudson Lowe is also the colonel of the Corsican Rangers, who are part of the garrison on Capri. And then the Corsican Rangers in 1810 are used to invade Santa Mora. So Hudson Lowe is actually one of the commanders that goes there. In the Maida campaign, a chap called Brigadier Oswald is under Stuart, who is leading the attack or leading the expedition to Santa Mora. Camus, who was one of the French brigadiers at Maida, he's actually the fortress commander on Santa Mora. So we've got all the same characters running through all the different games, all popping up. So you see the same, which I found interesting. So that's available on the Game Found. So you can buy both games. You can get Maida and you can get Capri and Santa Mora.
Oh, fantastic! I'm struck by the fact that all 4 of these first games involve an invasion. There's no. Have you tested your system out on a purely land campaign so far?
I'm going to be. So the next campaign, the next game I've got scheduled is about the Vendée. I'm going to do the Vendée, which really has got virtually no naval in it at all. There is perhaps the potential that the British might land some help on the coast, but which didn't really. There was the potential for that at the time, and it was talked about, and plans were made for it, but it didn't really happen. But that might be the only naval element that you'd introduce into that game. But the rest of it is all land. So the Vendée game will all be land. And then
Right.
after that, I'm some of these are all games that what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to it's almost like a design exercise. I'm trying to push the game in different directions of design to make sure I know how the system works, how the game works, the maths behind the dice and the maths behind the tables to get things to work how I want to. Because my overall goal is to then move into doing a larger game um, based in the Peninsula War, and I'm toying with the idea is I want to do the whole Peninsula War from 1808 to 1814 in one game. So
Wow.
it would be like the Egypt game, like because Egypt is 3.5 years. So there's quite a lot, and there's armies that arrive at
Yeah.
different times, and so I know the mechanics are kind of suited to it with the way that you can have these second events and this layer and chronology. Um, and then that's why I've done a three dice game with Centimore and Capri. Because I want to see if I can work it with different numbers of dice. Because for the Peninsula War, I'd probably make it a 5 dice game, and so you then have the possibility of 30 events with second events, and I might even introduce a third event as well, so you can replace a second tile. So there's lots of layer upon layer of stuff, and the Peninsula War. I mean, it's just like yeah, it's just like it's the golden goose, isn't it? I mean, it's just you want to do it. It's there's so much there to explore, and
Right.
it could play multiplayer. Easily do 3 player, a Spanish player, a British, Portuguese player, and a French player. But I think the French could be split between two, and so you could have a 4 player game: 2 French, 1 British, 1 Spanish. That would be
Well, I'm happy I'm happy to play, but with just two.
yeah.
But I know I'm I'm I may be alone in that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I do like. I mean, all the other games are all 2 players, and the Peninsula War, you would be able to play it 2 player as well. 1 player being all of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Allies and 1 player being all of the French. But I do also like to. I'd like to see if I could make it as a multiplayer game and not just a 2 player. I haven't done it yet,
And
so it's
those,
quite a task.
those are really popular things to play at club meetings and stuff like that, where you've got
Yeah.
you want to get 3 or 4 players. It's nice to be able to play a two-sided game multiplayer instead of playing Here I Stand or something where it's multiplayer but everybody stands alone.
Yeah.
A multiplayer where it's side versus side is a
Yeah.
completely different dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I have two final sort of questions about the future for you. Do you you're deep into this Napoleonic system? Do you envision yourself, or have you worked on any other game systems or eras?
Okay. So last year at PunchCon, uh, one of the people I was demonstrating the game to um, approached me about. I think you call it is it the American Revolution? We call it the War of Independence, but I think in America they call it I know you're Canadian, you're not American, but so it's
I'm halfway between.
yeah, the American Revolutionary Wars or the American War of Independence, whichever way you want to call it.
They seem to use both,
Right.
as far as I can tell.
Okay. So a chap called Peregrine Nichols, who's a great gamer, he's come to me with a concept and an idea about a game in the American Revolution that, to be honest, I don't think a game has ever been made on this subject. I can't find one on this campaign. Now, people will say, "God, yeah, every campaign, every battle in the American War of Independence must have been fought." I haven't found a game on this particular campaign. I'm not going to say what it is
Right.
because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh, we're going to work on a game for it and then see if we can make it work. And then that'll probably come out with the Vondi when we do the Game Found campaign for the Vondi game. We'll do this American War of Independence game. So it'll be using the Limits of Glory system, um, but different time, different. That's the idea. Um,
And
hmm.
will he co-design with you,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah?
yeah. He's got loads of
Is that what
ideas. He sent me loads
you
of
envision?
stuff already. It's fantastic.
Do you envision yourself as a publisher, uh, publishing other people, publishing other designers' games eventually, or will it is it
Yeah,
strictly to publish your own games?
I'm really open to doing that. A bit like we was talking about at the very start. I'd just like to help anyone that's that wants to do something. If I can, if I feel I could offer them something or I could help them in some way and make something that I'm interested in and they're interested in, then I would do that. I'm not in a position to be a big publisher and sign someone's game and say, I'll pay you royalties, and that's not
Mhm.
necessarily what I'm looking at. Um, Doing co-designs with people bringing their designs, and then just publishing for them. Um, Definitely, open to anything really that will help Form Square Games and help them. I'd like to have other publishers involved. Yeah, sorry,
It's
designers involved. Sorry.
that attitude reminds me a lot of, and what you talked to earlier about the help you had. Fort Circle Games, Kevin Bertram and Fort Circle Games out of Washington D.C.
Yeah,
He's he's great about being open. He publishes his basically his financial statement for the games,
yeah,
for the game companies. Like, it's his idea that the more people know what they're getting into, the better.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I think it really helps, and people are really understanding with the going back to what I was talking about earlier about shipping. So sending parcels to um, to America. I mean, America is definitely the biggest market. I sell 50% of everything I sell is going to America. So you know, all of the rest of the world put together, every other country in the world is probably slightly less than the American market. So sending a parcel to America, you know, you want that postage to be as low as possible, but it's really hard. I think for a single game, we're charging £29 postage, which you think, oh my goodness, £29. It's so much postage. But you're fortunate that the people that are receiving the games, they know and understand what's going on. They realise that you've only printed 200 games. You're not making any money out of it. You know, you're just trying to you're just trying to add to the hobby. Put your two pennies in, um, and people are, they're not thinking, oh, you're trying to rip me off, you're charging me too much, even though it's such a lot of money. People are still happy to pay it if they feel that they're getting something that they're interested in, they want to do. And I found that has been marvelous. So all the financials that you're talking about with Kevin Bertram and stuff, I don't really think there's anything too high, because I'll happily tell anyone anything, because I'm only
Oh yeah,
doing it
it's
for the
just
fun. Yeah.
oh, companies just don't come forward with that sort of information, and
No.
it's like you said, it's like, what's the point of hiding it? It's like,
Yeah.
this is there's no big secret of this is where we're keeping all the secret money.
No.
It's where all the money goes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I think we've had I got a really good understanding of what your company's all about and what the Limits of Glory system is all about. But was there anything else you wanted to let people know about before we wrap it up?
I think we've covered a lot of it. I can't think of anything in particular that I'm just really grateful that I've had so much support. I've been I've been a bit overwhelmed actually by the amount of support that I've had from people, and the comments I've had on, when I've posted on Facebook about stuff. You know, People only ever say nice things about, it's such a supportive hobby. Nobody's trying to say, oh, that's rubbish, or people are just genuinely happy for you. They're happy that your game's doing well. People are wanting to buy games to support you. It's just been great. I'm just really grateful, really, that I've been able to do this. It's been fantastic.
Well, I think you mentioned you've got this, or you have somebody who's brought you an idea for uh, an untapped campaign of the American War of Independence.
Mm.
But at the same time, I think by doing Egypt and Meta, they might not be there might be there might not be no games, but there's not a lot of games about the like you're definitely picking subjects that, especially I find like with people who love playing Napoleonics, they're just like they're rabid for something new, something that hasn't been, that's like not Waterloo or Austerlitz yet again, yet again, yet again, right?
Yeah, yeah, and
So
and
I think you've found a great niche.
yeah, and the limits of glory system and this game and the games that we've made are interesting because of the variability of the troop types that are involved. From guerrillas, like in Maida, you've got these Calabrian guerrillas, you've got the Russians, you've got the Neapolitans, you've got the British. So there's such a difference in the scale of the combat ability and what, but they've all got something they can do, and it's all finding what you can get out of what. That's it's just so interesting. I find
Right, yeah, which is that's the that's a that's the fun thing about our hobby. Our hobby is always asymmetrical,
yeah,
and that's always the fun thing. Is like, how do I make this thing work? This thing that I have work, because I don't have what they have,
mm,
so I gotta figure out this, and that's a for me that's a big part of every game that you ever play.
definitely, yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Andy. It's been a delight
Thanks.
to talk to you and find out more about this, and I can't wait to see Maida.
Yeah.
I've had such a good time with Bonaparte's Eastern Empire.
So thanks, Grant. I've really appreciated talking to you. It's been really good. So thank you.
All right,
Cheers.
thanks again. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. As I said earlier, there will be a regular episode of the podcast out probably within a week. Until then, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're watching this on video. As well, if you want to become a regular supporter of the channel, look in the comments or the description section of the video, and you'll see where you can sign up at Ko-fi, or come to my website pushingcardboard.com, and there's information there on becoming a regular supporter as well. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.